My parents emptied my college fund. Not a small portion of it. Not by accident. They sat at the dining table with the bank papers already spread out, and they transferred the money my late grandfather had spent years building for me. And they gave it to my brother's failing business. Then they told me I should be proud to sacrifice for family. That was years ago. Last month, they invited me to that same dining table to ask me for money again. My brother had a new business idea. My parents sat across from me with the same expressions they always used, the ones that said, "You will give us what we need because that is what you do." I let them finish talking. Then I placed one document on the table, and I said, "Your mortgage belongs to me now." This is the story of how I got there. My name is Elena, and I want to tell you about the night my parents stole my future, and the years it took me to understand that they had also, without meaning to, handed me the one lesson I needed most. I was 20 years old the evening I came home with my college admission letter. I had been accepted to the program I wanted. Not the backup. Not the one I had applied to because it was safer. The one I had worked toward for 3 years. The one my grandfather had talked about with me at his kitchen table, while he showed me how to read a bank statement and told me that education was not a luxury. It was a door, and he was going to make sure I had the key. I came home expecting, at minimum, a single moment where my parents looked at me and saw it. The house was wrong the second I walked in. Not loudly wrong. Quietly wrong. The kind of wrong you feel before you can name it. My mother Patricia was sitting at the dining table with her hands flat on the surface, the way she sits when she has already made a decision, and is waiting for the conversation about it to be over. My father Robert was standing near the window with his arms crossed. My brother Mark was pacing near the back of the room, doing the thing he does when he wants to look stressed without actually accepting responsibility for anything. Bank papers were spread across the table. I looked at them. I looked at my parents. And I said, "What's going on?" My father said, "We had to make a family decision." My mother would not look at me. And then I saw the account summary on the table. My name was at the top. The balance was almost nothing. I picked it up. I read the number. I said, "Where is my money?" My father said, "Your brother's business needed capital. Family comes first." I stood there holding the paper. I said, "Grandpa Henry left that money for my education. He set it up specifically for me. He told me himself." My mother looked up then. And she said it with the particular gentleness she uses when she is about to say something completely unreasonable. "Your grandfather would have wanted you to help your brother. That's what family does, Elena." I looked around the room. Nobody was going to say anything different. The admission letter was still in my hand. I felt my grip loosen, and I watched it slide out of my fingers and land on the floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. Before we go deeper, drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from right now. And if you have ever been forced to sacrifice your future, while someone else was shielded from their consequences. Stay with this story. Because Elena's silence in that room was not weakness. It was the beginning of something her parents never once considered possible. My brother came downstairs the next morning looking like a man who had resolved something. He poured himself coffee. He checked his phone. He sat down at the same table. And then, without being asked, without preamble, without even meeting my eyes first, he said, "Relax, Elena. Once the business picks up, I'll pay it back. It's not a big deal." I asked when. He said he was still working out projections. I asked why nobody had told me before they used the money, why there had not been a conversation, why I had walked in and found the decision already made. My father, from the doorway, said, "Because we knew you'd be dramatic about it." I absorbed that. 20 years old, standing in the kitchen, being told that my right to be consulted about my own future was dramatic. Mark added, and he said it with the ease of someone for whom other people's plans have always been adjustable. "It's not like you can't go to college later." Later. I was supposed to tuck my admission letter into a drawer and go to college later. I looked at my brother. I looked at my parents. And I understood, in the way you understand things that you have been half knowing for a long time without letting yourself fully see them. They were not sorry. They were waiting for me to accept the situation, so everyone could be comfortable again. The money was gone. My brother was not going to pay it back. And my job, as it had always been, was to be the member of this family who quietly absorbed whatever the rest of them decided to do. I called the university financial office 3 days after the dining table. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. I said the fund my grandfather had established was no longer intact. I asked what options were available. I asked about deferral, about emergency aid, about whether my admission could be held. The administrator was kind. She went through everything. She explained what they could offer and what they could not. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. The gap between what I needed and what I had was not closable. Not immediately. Not without time I was not being given. I went back to my parents. I showed them the numbers. I explained what was at stake. I asked if there was any way to restore even part of the fund before the deadline. My mother said, "You're young. You'll figure it out." My father said, "Other people start without advantages and do fine." Meanwhile, Mark was meeting with a branding consultant. He was ordering office furniture. He was running paid ads on social media for a business that had no customers yet. He was spending money that had been sitting in an account with my name on it 3 weeks earlier. I picked up extra shifts at the grocery store where I had worked part-time since I was 17. I came home at midnight with my work uniform still on, and a stack of scholarship application forms I had printed at the library. I fell asleep at my desk most nights. The admission window passed. Let me tell you about Grandpa Henry. He was not a wealthy man. He worked carefully and spent carefully and believed, with a certainty I have never seen matched, that the most important thing you could give a person was not money. It was options. He started teaching me how to read bank statements when I was 9. He would sit beside me at his kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside him, and walk me through every line item, explaining what each one meant, explaining why it mattered. He said, "Elena, the numbers tell a story. Learn to read the story and nobody can lie to you with the numbers." When I was 11, he opened the college fund. He showed me the account. He explained how compound interest worked. He said, "Every month I put something in, it grows a little. By the time you are ready, there will be enough for you to choose without someone else's permission." He came to every school award ceremony I had. Not because my parents never came, they sometimes did, but because he came first and he stayed longest, and he looked at me like the ceremony mattered because I was in it. He died when I was 16. And at his funeral, my mother stood at the graveside and said quietly, to no one in particular, "He would have wanted us to protect what he left." Elena did not just lose money that night at the dining table. She lost the last proof that someone in her family had planned a future with her in mind. 7 months after the fund was emptied, Mark's business closed. He had a list of reasons. The suppliers were unreliable. The market was wrong. The economy was difficult. A competitor had entered the space at the wrong time. He had been given bad advice. Every explanation was external. In none of them did my brother appear as a person who had made decisions. He appeared only as a victim of circumstances he could not have predicted, doing his best with what he had. He never once said, "I used Elena's money and it still was not enough." My parents received this information with the particular tenderness they reserved for Mark's difficulties. My mother made him a good dinner. My father sat with him and talked about what he might try next. The conversation was long and warm, and full of the kind of understanding that had never once been extended to me for a failure I had not even caused. I was at the table too. I said quietly, not cruelly, just honestly, "And what about what I lost?" My father looked at me with the expression he uses when he has decided that a question is a character flaw. "Stop keeping score, Elena." I looked at him. I thought about that phrase. Stop keeping score. As though acknowledging that something was taken from you was a form of greed. As though the person who was owed something was the one behaving badly by remembering it. I stored that phrase somewhere. I would need it later. If this story is already doing something to your chest, like this video now and subscribe for more stories like this one. Sometimes the deepest betrayal is not the thing people take from you. It is how calmly they expect you to live without it, as though your loss is simply the cost of being in a family that does not value you equally. I did not give up. I want to say that clearly, because it is not dramatic when you are living it. Giving up feels like relief. Not giving up feels like choosing, again and again, the harder thing. It is quiet and exhausting, and it does not look like much from the outside. I enrolled at the community college the following semester. The tuition was manageable on my own. The commute was long. The cafeteria coffee was weak. I took classes in the morning and worked the grocery store afternoon and evening shifts. I ate packed lunches on the bus. I applied for every scholarship I was eligible for. I won a small one in my second year, then a slightly larger one the year after. I took online finance and investment courses in the evenings, on a laptop that took 4 minutes to start up, in the corner of my bedroom with the door closed. I got a job at a small real estate debt management firm the year I turned 23. I was hired to do data entry and administrative support. I came early. I asked questions. I read every document I was permitted to read. I learned the language of distressed assets, mortgage notes, debt portfolios, and how money moves when people are not watching. I still struggled. I still cried sometimes. Usually quietly, usually alone, usually on the anniversaries of things that should have been celebrations. The year my original program would have graduated. The year my college fund would have been fully mature. But I stopped waiting for my family to repair what they had broken. And I started building something they could not reach. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I was reviewing a batch of distressed mortgage notes the firm was evaluating for possible acquisition. The work was detailed, cross-referencing addresses, checking payment histories, confirming that documentation was complete and legally sound before anything moved forward. I was about 40 notes into the list when I stopped. I went back one line. I read the address again. I knew that address. I had grown up there. I had done homework at the kitchen table in that house. I had stood at the dining room window at that address and watched my future disappear into my brother's business plan. I had come home to that address at midnight in a grocery store uniform with scholarship forms in my bag. My parents' home was on the list of distressed mortgage notes. I sat very still for a moment. Then I started reading the payment history. The mortgage had fallen behind. Not recently. The gaps in payment went back further than I had known. My parents, who had spent years presenting the image of a family that was financially careful and responsible, had been quietly falling behind on the mortgage for some time. The lender had flagged the note. It was being prepared for sale to an outside debt buyer at a discount. My hands were completely steady. That surprised me. I closed the spreadsheet. I went to find Ms. Carter. I told Ms. Carter what I had found. I told her the address was my parents' home. I told her the background, the college fund, the brother, the years of rebuilding. I did not perform it. I just said it factually, the way I had learned to say things at work, and let her decide what it meant. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked me what I wanted to do. I said I was not sure yet, but I wanted to understand my options. She explained it clearly. Buying a mortgage note does not mean buying a house. It means buying the right to collect the debt, to negotiate repayment, or, in certain circumstances following a legal process, to pursue foreclosure if the borrower defaults and refuses to cooperate. The process is governed by law. There are rules. There are timelines. There are things you can and cannot do. She said an investment entity would need to be in place. The acquisition needed to be legitimate, documented, and clean. There could be no irregularities. I said I understood all of that. I said I did not want illegal leverage. I wanted legal standing. Ms. Carter looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Power is not shouting, Elena. Power is knowing exactly what the paper says before anyone else reads it." We spent the next several weeks working through every detail. I asked every question twice. I checked every number. I made sure everything was exactly as it should be. And then, through a small legal investment entity I had formed the year before for a different purpose, I submitted the acquisition offer on the mortgage note. It was accepted. My mother called on a Wednesday evening. She was warm in the way she is warm when she needs something, a specific, targeted warmth, like a lamp pointed in one direction. She asked how I was doing. She said she had been thinking about me. She said it would be lovely to have a family dinner, all of us together. I knew. I think I always knew when the call meant something was coming. But I went. The dinner was fine on the surface. Food on the table. Conversation about nothing in particular. My mother had made the dishes she makes when she wants to remind you that she loves you. My father was at the head of the table being measured and calm. And then Mark arrived, a little late, and sat down, and my father cleared his throat and said, "Your brother has a new project. A real one this time. We thought it might be worth hearing him out. You have a good job now. You understand finance. After all, we helped you become responsible." I set my fork down. Mark explained the concept. It was not a bad idea, technically. But the person presenting it had no track record of following through, no demonstrated ability to manage money, and no acknowledgement anywhere in the pitch that the last time this family had pooled resources for his benefit, only one person had paid a price. He finished by saying, "You owe the family too, you know. We all pull together." The old version of me would have felt the guilt move through her like water finding a crack. I sat with it. The guilt arrived, exactly as it always had. And I let it come. And I waited. And it passed. I said, "Let me show you something. Some people only remember that you are family when they need something from you. And some families never stop being surprised when the person they spent years overlooking finally stops being available on demand. If you believe Elena deserved her future, deserved the fund, the education, the choices her grandfather planned for her, comment she deserved her future below. We want to hear from you." I reached into my bag. I placed a folder on the table. It was a plain manila folder. Nothing printed on the front. I had not dressed it up or made it theatrical. I placed it in the center of the table the same way my father had placed the bank papers the night they told me my college fund was gone. Robert frowned. Patricia said, "What is that?" Mark had already lost interest and was looking at his phone. I said, "This is not an investment proposal. It is your mortgage notice." My father laughed first. It was not a large laugh, just a short, dismissive breath that said, "This is absurd," and beneath a response. Mark looked up from his phone, assessed the situation, and added, "You work at an office for 2 years and now you think you own banks?" I said, "No. I own the debt." The room changed. Not all at once. In sequence. Mark's expression shifted from dismissive to uncertain. My mother's face moved through confusion and arrived somewhere closer to fear. My father reached forward and pulled the folder toward him and opened it. He read the first page, then the second. I watched his face. I said, "The mortgage fell behind. The lender sold the note to a debt buyer at a discount. I acquired it through a legal investment entity I established. The address on page 1 is this address. That is this house." My mother said, "That can't be right." I said, "The documentation is on pages 3 and 4. My father looked up at me from across the same table, where he had told me family comes first, and my brother's needs outweighed my future. I looked back at him. I had stopped keeping score a long time ago. I had simply started keeping records. My father spoke first. His voice had the tight, controlled anger of a man who is furious, but has realized he is no longer holding the authority in the room. He said I was trying to destroy the family. He said no good daughter would do something like this. He said I had turned a private family matter into something calculated and cold. My mother was crying. She said, "How could you do this to your own parents?" I said, "You did not ask that when you emptied my college fund." Mark started to say something. I turned to him. I said, "You told me you would pay it back. That was 6 years ago. You never once attempted a payment. You never once acknowledged what it cost me. You started a new project and expected me to fund it." He said the business had failed. He said it was not his fault. He said things had been difficult. I said, "So did my first dream. But nobody grieved that except me." The room held that sentence. I did not say anything else for a moment. I let it sit in the air the way the things you have needed to say for years always deserve to sit. Completely, without being rushed past or explained away. My father said, "Stop keeping score." And I said, "I'm not keeping score anymore, Dad. I'm just the one holding the paperwork." I said, "I am not here to make you homeless." My mother looked up. I said, "I am here to stop being robbed," and then called selfish for noticing. I explained the terms. I was not interested in theatrical revenge. I was interested in 4 specific things. First, a written acknowledgement that the college fund was used without my consent. Not a verbal apology. A written record. Signed. Second, a formal repayment plan for the money that was taken. Not the full amount in one payment. I understood that was not realistic. A documented plan, with actual dates and actual numbers. Third, my brother would no longer approach me with business proposals or requests for financial involvement of any kind. Fourth, my parents would stop describing what happened 6 years ago as a family sacrifice. It was not a sacrifice I agreed to. It was a decision made about my life without my knowledge or permission. That was not sacrifice. That was theft. And I would not participate in any version of the story that called it anything else. If they agreed, I would work with Ms. Carter to restructure the debt repayment in a way that kept the house secure and gave them time. If they refused, the legal process would continue on its own terms, without me intervening on their behalf. I said, "You have always told me that family helps family. I am still willing to help. But I am no longer willing to help people who have never acknowledged that they hurt me." It was not dramatic. Real things rarely are. My mother put her hands over her face. And then she lowered them. And she said, not with the managed tears she uses to redirect rooms, but with the face of someone who has run out of management. We were already behind. On everything. When Mark said the business could fix it, we wanted to believe him. We were scared, Elena. We were embarrassed and scared, and we made a choice we should not have made. I said, "I know you were scared. I understand that." I said, "But what I need you to understand is that you were not the only one who was scared." I was 20 years old. I had worked toward that admission for 3 years. I had watched Grandpa Henry build that fund for a decade. And in one evening it was gone. And then you looked at me while I was afraid and hurting, and you told me I was being dramatic. My mother started to speak. I said, "I need you to hear me finish. Then why did you let me think I was the selfish one?" She did not answer. Robert was completely silent. The proud, stern man who had told me to stop keeping score was sitting at his own dining table looking at the document his daughter had placed there, and he did not have a single word. And then my phone rang. Aunt Vivian. She said she had heard from a cousin that there was a family dinner tonight, and she needed to say something. She had been holding on to it for years. She had not known if she should say it, but she felt Elena needed to hear it. She said, Grandpa Henry had called her before he died. He had told her specifically that the college fund was not to be touched. He had told Patricia directly. He had asked Patricia to promise. Patricia closed her eyes. Aunt Vivian had been keeping it for 6 years. Grandpa Henry had left it with her. He had told her to give it to Elena when she was older, when she was ready, when she would need it most. She handed it to me without a speech. I sat down. I opened it. My dear Elena, if Vivian is giving you this letter, then some time has passed, and I am no longer there to hand it to you myself. I hope you have been well. I hope you have been stubborn in the good ways I always saw in you. I want you to know why I built the fund. It was not only because I wanted you to have an education. It was because I watched how this family worked, and I could see that you were often the one expected to give so that others could take. I saw how quietly you did it. I saw how rarely anyone noticed. And I decided that whether or not anyone ever noticed, you would have something that was entirely yours. Education is not just a degree, my girl. It is the proof that you belong in rooms where decisions are made. It is the thing that makes your voice hard to dismiss. I do not know what has happened between when I wrote this and when you are reading it. But I know you. And I know that if things went wrong, you have probably been blaming yourself for longer than was fair. So I want to say this clearly. Love that always asks you to lose yourself is not love you should obey blindly. Your life is not a backup plan for someone else's mistakes. You were never the extra one, Elena. You were the one I was most certain about. With all my love forever, Grandpa Henry. I cried. Not the tears I had cried in my bedroom at midnight in a grocery store uniform. Not the tears of someone who is hurt and has nowhere to put it. These were different. These were the tears of someone who has been seen, finally, by someone who loved them enough to plan for their future even from the other side of it. My mother, across the room, was also crying. Nobody said anything for a while. And sometimes that is exactly the right thing. In the months that followed, things changed. Slowly. Imperfectly. The way real things change. My parents signed the acknowledgement. I did not make it a ceremony. Miss Carter was there. We sat at a different table, her office, and the papers were signed and witnessed and filed properly. My mother's hand shook slightly when she signed. My father did not look up when he finished. A repayment plan was established for the college fund. The amounts were modest, realistic rather than symbolic. But they were documented. They were scheduled. And each payment that arrived on time meant something that no amount of verbal apology ever had. Mark got a regular job. A straightforward one, at a logistics company, with a manager above him and a salary that did not depend on anyone else's belief in his vision. He did not announce this to anyone as a victory. He simply started showing up for it. And slowly, over months, he began to pay back a small portion of what had been taken. Not because he was forced to buy the terms, but because somewhere in the dining room confrontation, something had shifted in him that he had not yet found words for. I kept my distance. Not as punishment. As honesty. The relationship we had before was not a good one for me. Building a better one would take time that neither of us could rush. I visited when I chose to. I answered calls when I had the capacity. I was not cold. But I was no longer available in the way I had been trained to be available, immediately, completely, without cost. I enrolled in an evening program. A full degree program this time. It was slower than the original path I had planned at 20, but it was mine, entirely mine, built on money I had earned and scholarships I had competed for, and a fund that was finally being restored to what it had always been meant to be. On a Sunday in October, I drove to the cemetery where Grandpa Henry was buried. I sat beside his grave for a while. I told him some of what had happened. Not all of it. Some things you tell and some things you just carry with you into a quiet afternoon. I had his letter in my pocket. I had carried it there every day since Aunt Vivian gave it to me. They emptied Elena's college fund because they believed her future was the safest thing to sacrifice. They told her to stop keeping score, while they kept the house. They called it family. They called it sacrifice. They called it love. But years later, the debt they ignored found its way back to the daughter they had underestimated. And Elena did not need to shout to win. She only needed to become the one person in the room who had learned to read what the paper said. If this story touched your heart, like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who has been taught to shrink themselves for a family that never returned the favor. And tell us in the comments, if you were Elena, would you forgive them after they completed the repayments, or would you keep your distance regardless? There is no wrong answer. We read every single one.